Hello, Fuel Milwaukee. Come on into the discussion. My name is Corey Biddle, and this is Fuel Milwaukee's live discussion on how other countries think about the concept of race. We're going to have a really interesting conversation with a panel of Milwaukeeans who have lived in various places around the globe. So, for all of you who are passionate about travel, this is going to be an interesting conversation to you, and for more than one reason. Uh, for those who are here because they're really interested in diving a little bit more into the concept of race and what racism might look like in countries, and maybe what we can learn or steer away from based on what we hear today. Really wanted to have this conversation to keep the thought process going. People are so open right now to having conversations that, you know, 6 weeks ago would have been very uncomfortable for a lot of people. We're in a different world now. I think people are ready to face what may have been uncomfortable conversations now, because it's not about being uncomfortable. It's about understanding the dynamics of race, racism, the concept, whether it's real or not, and dismantling the negative effects of the way that these concepts have manifested in our society, in our culture, in our workplaces, in our homes, and in our relationships with each other. So thank you all for being here. As always, if you have a question that you'd like to elevate to the panel and you just want to share it with me privately, go ahead and leave that in the Q&A space. If you want to get in the chat room and start talking to other folks, feel free to do that. I really enjoy reading the chat transcripts after the conversations are over. I like seeing you guys interact with each other and with the panelists. So we've invited the panelists to go into the Q&A space and interact with you. So feel free to go in that space, ask questions of each other and the entire panel. So I see we got close to 100 people in the room right now. So go in the chat right now and tell me what you were hoping to gain from this conversation. Give me a little chat comment. Start us off with that comment. And then if you have lived anywhere outside of the U.S., leave us a comment and say that in the chat. That'll be fun to see too. So welcome to the space. Now let me dive in and kind of introduce you to this amazing panel. I'm just so excited to have this conversation. Hey Beth, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Beth is the program officer for LISC Milwaukee. Chrishella Roché. Hey Chrishella. She might be muted. Hey Chrishella.
Hey everybody, I was muted.
She's at the Sherman Phoenix, which is I guess there's people up there now, so that's
just popping in and out to get lunch, but we're preparing paint kits to go, so that's why we're here.
Okay, we'll talk about paint kits to go at the end of this, because I know I want one. Thanks for being here, Chrishella.
Thank you for having me.
Olivier, how are you?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to this. You were highly recommended for this conversation.
So I hear.
Tashonda, how are you?
I'm doing great today. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so good to see your face. Mainza, how you doing?
Doing well, Corey Joe. Thanks for having me, and it's great to be amongst friends and new friends as well.
New friends with a shared passion for travel. You see all of their affiliations there. I mean, a lot of these folks, you know, this panel, you know a lot of their work, and you know a lot of their faces. I will have to say, Dr. St. Jacques was going to be our resident historian today. She had a family emergency and wasn't able to participate in the call, but we'll make sure we bring her back if we do a part 2. So at the end, you guys have to let us know if we do a part 2 and kind of bring her back. So she was going to give a little bit of historical perspective to all the content that we're going to share today. Since she's not here to do that, I think a lot of you will have a lot of that same historical background and knowledge. Feel free to share it in the chat. Otherwise, I'm really excited to get started with the conversation and find out about these great panelists. So what I want to do first is have, I'm going to go to each of the panelists and have you talk to us a little bit about, tell us where you've lived, and I'm curious about what took you there. So let's start with Tashonda.
I was hoping I was going to be last. my story is very, very unique. Back in 2016, I was presented with a unique opportunity to travel around the world for a full year. That trip took me to Prague, Czech Republic, Chiang Mai, Thailand, Medellin, Colombia, and Cape Town, South Africa. So I lived in 4 countries, 3 months at a time. And while I was there, I just kind of bounced around pretty much every country that we were in. I took side trips and bounced around. So I've seen a lot while I was abroad. What took me there was like this constant urge and desire from as young as I can remember, just this itch and nick inside of me to just want to see the world. I would see what was on TV and I would hear all the stories, and I could just remember as young as probably 9 being like, I want to go to Africa. I want to go to Africa. I'm going to go to Africa. And that was actually my second international trip. I went to Accra, Ghana. And after that, it was like a fire was lit inside of me. So when the opportunity presented itself, I took it. I took a sabbatical for a full year and did it. So that's where "girl, you going where" came from. Because literally, that's what people was asking me. Like, "Girl, you going where?"
You created a blog based on your travels.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, Mainza, how about you?
So I started when I was a young professional, I like to say. So in my early 2000s, I was at a crossroads in my life. I had graduated from college, from undergrad, a couple of years, had worked professionally for a couple of years, and was at the crossroads of, do I want to go on to higher education, or do I want to take advantage of the fact that I'm single, I'm young, I could do something that would be unique. I'm also Hmong, and so my generation, we were kind of the generation of understanding the value of not getting married young, because that was a cultural practice for the older generations. And I was in my mid-20s and I was like, I ain't getting married yet. There's so much to do. And so it was deciding between law school and then the Peace Corps. So I ended up applying to both, plus a new job. And it all kind of just worked to the benefit of saying, hey, this is my chance to do me and travel out of the country and experience so much of life that many other young Hmong women probably would never have gotten to experience from my generation, and even now to this day. And so I lived abroad in Thailand for 2.5 years as a Peace Corps volunteer, but also then I was able to work with the Hmong refugee community in Thailand and relocate the last group of Hmong refugees from Thailand to here, to the US and to other parts of the other countries as well. So that's, and then of course I've done a bunch of traveling too, but in terms of living abroad, that's where I spent my time living abroad.
Very nice. How about you, Beth?
So similarly to Mainza, I was also a Peace Corps volunteer. And I was in Romania in Eastern Europe. And, I had that same itch that Tashonda had from a young age of like, I grew up in a super small town, 1 stoplight in the county. And I always just like wanted to know what else was out there. And you see things on TV and movies, and you just know that there's so many varied experiences in our country and in our world. And I just wanted to, I'm a naturally curious person, and I just wanted to, see what else was out there and learn more about myself and learn more about the world. And had worked at a summer camp in high school, always had international counselors that would come to the United States. And so I was just always really curious, couldn't really, wasn't able to do study abroad or anything like that in college. And so outside of college, I did an AmeriCorps program, and I was doing a visioning exercise and of what was next for me. And it was really important for me to take that time in my 20s to really have a different experience and be able to travel and have that different perspective. And I think that that's one of my favorite things about travel is, I think if you have the right mindset, you learn so much about yourself, you learn so much about another place in the world, you begin to see commonalities. And for me, it was really learning about privilege in an emotional way, because I think you can think about privilege in an intellectual way, but being an American living in Eastern Europe, where Romanians at that time didn't have a lot of freedom to travel, they weren't part of the EU, and seeing the different way people were treated based on where they were from in the world, really started my journey in really understanding privilege too. And I think that that's one of the benefits of travel. If you open yourself up and you're open to letting the experience change you, it can be really rewarding.
That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, Olivier, we'll go to you next.
Sure. So I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. My mother is French Canadian. My father is from Haiti. So there's a little bit of a global perspective from my upbringing. My father moved the family to Madison when I was 17. So I went to 2 years of high school in Madison, and have been in the States ever since. But I've traveled a fair amount. My wife is also half Indonesian, so we've been to Bali. And prior to going to law school, I worked in France through a program that she had done studying abroad. I didn't study abroad when I was in college, and we met pretty early on. So she encouraged me. I was going to have a year between undergrad and law school. So she encouraged me to apply to the program. And so I taught English, even though I'm a first language French speaker. I taught English in grade schools in Paris for a year. And so I lived in Paris for a whole year, and then moved back, and have been in the States ever since. And we do a fair amount of traveling. And there's a global perspective in our household.
There's very interesting conversations right now. Can't wait to come over for dinner and hear what everyone has to say. Chrishella, how about you?
Hey everybody, Chrishella Roché. In 2014, after working or teaching 3 years in Milwaukee, towards the end of the school year, or pretty much at the end of the school year, the school I was working for cut over half of their staff due to budget cuts. And so I was pretty much stuck trying to find a school to work at, and just really exploring all of my options. A friend told me about teaching overseas. I applied. I didn't hear anything for like 3 months, and then all of a sudden I got an email. They wanted to do a Skype interview. I had 3 back-to-back interviews, day-to-day interviews, and then less than 30 days later, I was on a flight to Abu Dhabi. So it was a really quick process. I taught over there for 3 years. I taught English, math, and science. And being over there allowed me to travel way more than being in the States. So I think all in all, from my time in the States and my time overseas, I maybe traveled to over 15 countries. And so I have quite a few experiences living, teaching, and working abroad. And then I brought those experiences, and good or bad, back here to Milwaukee, and here I am.
Thank you. Very interesting. So many different perspectives. So I'm sure people that are listening right now, if you have any questions right now for any of the panelists, they can see your questions. So if you have questions about where they've been, how they felt while they were there, go ahead and put that in the chat. Also, if you've lived abroad or in a different country outside of the US, please make a comment in the chat so we can see where you've been too. The reason why we wanted to have this conversation, and I'll share my screen, so you guys can see my colleague here at MMAC. She's the Vice President of Membership for Small Business at MMAC, Stephanie Hall. Was chatting with her, and she was talking about the series that Fuel has been doing, and she said, you know, it'd be really interesting to see what the concept of race is like in other countries. And I kind of made a Facebook post and a post on LinkedIn, and a bunch of people started sharing their experiences and tagging you guys. And I thought, well, you know what? I think we have enough people to have this conversation, so let's do it. So I think, I mean, I'm a native Milwaukeean, and I don't travel a lot. I've been to Canada for a family reunion for a few days. Other than that, I've been in Milwaukee and then the sexy city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I went to college. So I don't have a lot of, I mean, I've traveled for weddings and trips, but I've never developed a passion for travel. Travel has always been a function of having to do something else, and the sightseeing and really experiencing taking in another culture. I can't say that I've really had that experience. So since you all have had that experience and obviously have a passion for it, how do you react to what we're seeing now in the US around the concept of race and racial prejudice and institutional racism, everything that we're seeing in the world? Do you think that you are processing this differently as a traveler or as somebody that has lived outside of the US? Anybody can jump in and touch on that.
I think my mic is off, so I'll go first. But I think because I have lived outside of the country, I'm able to view what's going on with a worldview based on experience. While things are not the greatest everywhere for us, at home, we're able to feel the difference versus when we're abroad. It's a lot different when we're abroad. Not everybody, not everywhere you go, view race relations the same. Specifically, like when you go to Africa, anywhere in Africa, for the most part, you're the majority, you're not the minority. And it feels totally different. Whereas here at home, we're the minority and how it's viewed is totally different. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to add that another thing that I do, I'm also a part of, I work for an organization called Nomadness Travel Tribe. So within Nomadness Travel Tribe, we get to see all these experiences of people still living abroad, living in America. One thing that I struggle with is that there's so many people outside of America looking at us with the side eye. And being American and then having an experience of living outside of America, I'm not saying that, like Chrishella said, it's not the best for us everywhere, but it does make you think that like it has to be something better outside of America than what we're experiencing here. And I'm not necessarily just the race relations, but just overall, like there has to be something better. And that's a constant thought in the back of my head since I've been back. Like, am I living in the right place? Because people are definitely, and I see these threads on all these travel groups, on Facebook, social media. You see these threads of people living other places looking at us like, what's happening there?
Absolutely. Just piggybacking off of what Tashonda just said, like, often there's this misconception that people just want to get to America because it's the land of the free and milk and honey and X, Y, and Z. But when other countries are looking at us, people from other countries are looking at us, I've had someone say, why would I want to go there? Why would I want to go there when I can die just for being the color that I am? I can stay home and live peacefully with my family and be just fine. I've had that said to me on more than one occasion, and it makes it, as a Black woman or a Black person from America, it makes it a little bit hard.
Mm-hmm. Miza, did you have something you want to share?
Yeah, I was just going to share that back in the early 2000s when I went away, and now for the life of me, I can't remember, but I just remember at that point in my young life, I was just very disillusioned with our country. And so going, abroad with the Peace Corps was just such a great way to kind of escape it. But while I was there, you know, and kind of to the point of some of the comments that were made already too, on the flip side, you know, I really learned to appreciate, you know, the US and just some of the structure, some of the infrastructure, you know, and accountability, though we could debate this, but accountability that we can hold people or government to, you know, to some extent. So I really appreciated after my time living abroad. But now, you know, when we talk about what's happening right now in our country, I oftentimes think back to if I were there now, if I had the opportunity to live abroad now, would I feel that same way? Would I still have that appreciation of our country? And I hate to be the Debbie Downer and I hate to be so pessimistic, but when I was living abroad in Thailand, and going to Thailand was kind of my returning to my roots too, right? But even my time there, it's still bitter, very bittersweet when I think about it, because I was thinking, yay, I'm going to go to this Asian country and they're going to welcome me home, right? And it was the exact opposite. And it was so traumatizing for me. And in my cohort of Peace Corps volunteers, there was myself, an Asian American, there was an African American man, and then there was a Latina from New York. We were the only 3 people of color in our cohort, and we experienced great racism in Thailand. Myself as an Asian American, you know, and so it's, to me, when I think about it, when I reflect on that time then in a different country and to where our country is now, it's a little sad. And other countries I've traveled to, I've seen racism too. It's not unique, unfortunately, or fortunately, to us here. And that's what makes, you know, I think that's what makes it hard for me when I even think about traveling anywhere else and thinking that, is there a better place for me?
Mm-hmm. Beth, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, how I really reflect on what's happening, I agree with everything that's been said. I think all really great points. And one thing that I am thinking about a lot is this, especially the folks in the United States that are holding on so deeply to this, you know, Southern culture around the Confederacy. I really think about that and compare that to what I was able to observe in Romania as an outsider, in terms of all of the historical battles and ethnic changes that happened in the country, and how those 100-year, 200-year, 300-year, 400-year, 500-year, you know, beefs are still active in people's, some at a cellular level almost, in the way that they interact with one another. And so it's more of a comparison. You know, America is still a teenager in a lot of ways in terms of our culture. And I think we are at a shifting point of how we're viewed in the world, and that there is the luster of the newness of America has worn off. And so it will be interesting to see in the next year or two how that continues to evolve. I mean, I had the same experience as mine, but in terms of, you know, really learning to appreciate some things about our country, really learning to be skeptical about some things in our country. For example, as a Peace Corps volunteer, we got International News Week delivered every week to our houses. And I would have friends send magazines from the United States, and the international version had a completely different lens and focus than the US version. And it was the first time that I really started to think about how our media shapes our views of things. And I think that that's such a pertinent topic right now, of what people listen to and how it shapes their worldview, and how dangerous that can be. And it can strip away some of that government accountability. It can strip away some of that pure belief in democracy. So I kind of rambled through a few things, but
All good stuff.
I think there's, you know, the ability to make that comparison when you lived in another place and kind of keep that global perspective.
Olivier?
Yeah, what surprised me when I was living in France, and obviously my perspective is based directly on France, but I saw it and heard it from other people who lived in other European countries, was that there was a different kind of rigidity, and that's more class-based, right? You have colonialism that the Europeans deal with, so you have immigrants that come back from those former colonies, whether they be in Africa or different places in the world. And to my surprise, it was my Black friends in Paris who were always wanted to know more about America. And the perspective that they had was that immigrants and Black folks in France aren't, everybody's expected to assimilate, right? There's a French model, this is what we're about, and everybody should be happy. It's a model it's a word laïcité, which means basically no state religion, nothing's mandated, but you still have a very, European culture that's already there, Christianity mostly. And so, and they were always fascinated about America, right? And the ability, and it probably has to do with America's history, right? We're a young nation, and it's tied to slavery and everything that it brings. So there's a willingness to have that discussion here at least. And there's been confrontations, there's been the Civil War, there's ongoing discussions of it, and that's not necessarily present in Europe. That's just kind of, we're here, we have a lot of history, we've been here for thousands of years, so you should adopt our model and learn to mold yourself to us. And so my Black friends were always wanted to know, we're surprised by how much advertising displayed Black families and everything else, and all aspects of life, not necessarily in a caricature way, but just it was normal. And to them, that was fascinating, and they always wanted to know more. So I was surprised by how much love there was in some part, and other parts. I mean, I was there in 2003 or 4, so every other person was, how could Americans vote for George Bush? And I wasn't even American in answering for America and all of its sins in every conversation otherwise. So it was interesting to see some of those perspectives.
That's really interesting. I think because that the distinction between race and class came up when we were chatting about this on the social media platforms. And so from my perspective as a native Milwaukeean, I mean, we all know Milwaukee is very segregated, and race has just been an ever-present concept for me. And I'm always sort of confused when people say, why do people make everything about race? And I'm like, I don't know, it just seems like everything is always about race. I just always feel it everywhere that I go, just constantly. I also used to run the Black Holocaust Museum, so conversations like this were just that people came to the museum to have that space to have these conversations. So I have a huge tolerance for what a lot of people would think were a little uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about this, and kind of scary. And now people are so much more open to talking about it because it's just out here now. So I'm wondering and anyone can respond to this, when you went to other places, did you feel the ever presence of race the way that it is perceived or the way that it is felt here? Or just explain a little bit what the difference might be or what it felt like wherever you were.
I could say that out of all the places that I was in, I had the most experience with race in Prague, in Vienna. The other places, Chiang Mai, Cape Town, Medellin, those were all more so colorism and class. Like I dealt with struggles of classism and colorism. In the other countries, Prague more so was related to race. I can recall riding on a train, sitting next to, just riding on the train, and you don't see a lot of African women, let alone African American women in Prague. So when you see African women, there's a huge sex trafficking community in Prague, and that's the only time you see African women. Mm-hmm. So me being an African American woman, looking African, to be honest, I do feel like I have strong features. They didn't know whether I was someone that was a part of that community or until I opened my mouth, until they heard me speak English or pull out my phone and use my Google Translate. A little girl didn't want to sit next to me on the train. We were called niggers, you know, on the train. Like, I had those race-related issues in Prague. And I think that, to me, it was like, I think I had a moment where I went home and I talked to my mom, like, it don't matter where we are. Like, this, it was just, it hit me that hard because I was just, you know, touring all their castles and going all these places. And then I had that one experience and it just shifted my whole perspective of, like, you know, I left America not to be called that or be viewed that way. And then I'm here all the way around, halfway across the world, and I'm hearing it again. Like, it just shifted my experience. Like, this is going to be different. I think that's where I woke up and was like, this is going to be a different experience.
So, I mean, this is a year-long trip for you. So you have this experience in Prague.
The second month I was gone.
Wow. Oh, no. Were there other places that you went where you felt like your African heritage was celebrated, or people thought you were more interesting or were curious about you because of it?
In Thailand, like, I really felt embraced, and like I felt like people were more open to, like, learn and have dialogue about African American culture. It was a huge African American community in Chiang Mai as well. So I think they were just more welcoming, more just more open to, like, having conversation about our culture and wanting to learn. I think out of all the places, that was my most warm, welcoming space.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
Wow, Tashonda, that is such an interesting perspective, because during my time in Thailand, right, the three of us that I had shared earlier were people of color, and especially our African American friend. And we were there for 2 years, and we traveled the country, like, as a group, you know, vacationing and doing things together. And everywhere he went, it was the extreme opposite, you know. And then for me, I guess for me it wasn't racism, but for me it was ethnocentrism, because the Hmong are a minority group in Thailand and are very much looked down upon. And so when Thai folks learned that I was Hmong and from America, it was like, wow, how'd you get so or how were you so privileged to, you know, have been born in the US? And so it was constantly the looking down on me as, wow, you're Hmong, how'd you even end up over there? You know, so it was those layers. But I just found it really interesting, Tashonda, that you had such a different experience than our friend, you know, and colorism, to your point, is huge there.
Yeah.
It's how light, how dark skinned you are, and using powder, right, Tashonda? You probably, right, to just lighten up your skin.
And the lotion. There's bleach lotion. There's pretty much the lotion, body wash,
everything.
bleach in it. But I will say that you were there in the early 2000s, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Now the communities there. Bangkok has a huge African American community. Chiang Mai has a huge African American community where they're literally, like, remote workers, project managers. People are just relocating over to Southeast Asia, and I think that it's bringing money to the economy. Wow. And people are more open to. And then there's so many upgrades, so more money in the economy. More malls, more apartments, more condos being built. It's restructuring the commercial landscape over there. So and it's so affordable. So it's bringing a lot of Americans over to Southeast Asia, and I just think that because of that, it requires you to be more open. It's like money's coming in, so
that's right.
You know, make these connections, these partnerships, these. Having these conversations, that I think that's where that's why a lot of those spaces are just, like, more open, and people are having those conversations now. but that's the most accepting place that I felt. I felt like the more welcome there. If I was gonna go there again this year, since I've been there twice since I've been home.
Wow.
That is great to hear.
For me, I want to say my high and my low were both living in the Middle East, living in Abu Dhabi. The Black or African American community there is so big. The recruiting company I went through to teach for, they recruit in Georgia, California, Chicago, like New York, all the major hubs for teachers, and that's where they get most of their teachers from. So being of a community where we kind of had to gravitate towards each other to create our own little family, that felt really good because it wasn't just Americans, it was Black people from all over that would come together, and you just.
Did she freeze for you guys?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay.
Like Tashonda said, like the unfortunately Black women are thought of in some areas as like prostitutes or, you know, streetwalkers, people of that nature. I went back to my nice hotel where I paid for my room. I was going to the elevator and the security stopped me and tried to force me to prove that I was supposed to be there and that I am not there to go try to knock on somebody's door. Now, me being me, that didn't fly well for him. I went to my room, but everybody's not.
She froze again. I think we got her point.
All it takes is one experience for, you know, people to feel unwelcome.
Chrishella, your American accent, did that change anything?
Yes, but more so my passport. There's something that people don't realize we have as passport holders is passport privilege. I'm, you know, looking at me, I have very African features, so people will assume that I'm African from Africa. Then you hear me speak, maybe I moved to America, but once they see my passport, they're like, oh no, she's American, she's Black American, and they have questions about Black America and, you know, how do people vote for, you know, Trump and everything. But there's a lot of privilege that comes with your passport in itself.
Yeah.
Olivier, did you have something that you wanted to share?
I mean, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier and a little bit of the class rigidity. It was interesting to see. I mean, the French would consider themselves more welcoming towards minorities, and in some ways, in many ways, they are. Right? They're culturally celebrated. There's a lot of acceptance and a lot of love in the community, but systemically, in many ways, it's worse because of what I was talking about, the class system before. Right? You have France is obsessed with labels. So everything that is good and that they're proud of, whether it's their wine, their cheeses, everything has a pedigree, and it's a long line of how you get there, and only certain wines and certain regions are able to use a certain label to be called that. It's a source of pride, but with that comes a very rigid system, meaning that if you don't go to the right schools, you won't get the right jobs and you won't get the economic access. And just like everywhere else in the world, in order to get to the right schools, you got to live in the right neighborhood. And so the end result is kind of the same, although the attitude will be different. The end result is very much the same. Lack of access. And the French people that I talk to, especially the ones that move here, really appreciate the idea that you can reinvent yourself as an American, right? Even if you didn't study math your whole life, if you're good at finance, you can do it here. And if you can make it work, people, if you can do the work in this country, people will welcome you and accept you as that. Whereas in France, if you try to do the work without the pedigree, without the degree, without the right schools, they look at you as being incapable of doing it. You don't come from the right, pedigree, so I can't even hire you because you won't be able to do it. You didn't go to the right school. So there was that kind of systemic discrimination built in, so that although outwardly it's very welcoming and celebrates diversity, in effect, it doesn't.
It's a class.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting. And as the panelists are responding in the chat, I think the setting is defaulted for panelist comments to go to other panelists. So when you comment to other folks in the chat, make sure you switch the setting so it goes to panelists and participants. I think that's what it says. But Olivier, to that point, I think when I was a little kid, I just remember watching so many movies about Black history and Black celebrities and just really African-American icons that really found a safe haven in France. Mm-hmm. And as a little kid, that made me think, France is the place to go if you're a Black person, not realizing a lot of that might have had to do with the fact that they were actually celebrities. Mm-hmm. And that came with a certain status. As I got older, I learned that it was a little bit more dynamic than that, but there's a really interesting history between African Americans and France. It's just sort of finding a home.
There's a lot of love for American Black culture, though, like everywhere else in the world, though, also, right? I mean, it's just the kind of the zeitgeist of what is driving culture almost everywhere around the world.
Mm-hmm. And now that you said that, I think that I've had extremely interesting experiences when it comes to like American culture and how it's perceived in other countries. So like as a Black woman, the perception of what, and in my experience, I'm just speaking to my experience personally, being in other countries, like I was in Bali, and we were walking down the street and we were like called like loving hip hop. And they were saying the B word, like girl, and it caught me off guard because I'm like walking down the street and I'm thinking, you know, oh, so beautiful. I'm in Bali. I just saw this beautiful sunset and I'm just having this awesome experience. And it was like, loving hip hop. They were literally calling us down the street. And then, and they were just like, girlfriend, and let me tell you. And it was just like, wait, what? And it was the same experience. Oddly enough, Chrishella talks about being in Africa, but while I was in South Africa, I think I struggled the most there because in South Africa, I thought it was just going to be this, you know, I'm home, I'm on my continent, like, oh my goodness. And this girl, while I was out, grabbed my hair and was like, you have hair like mine. She had extensions. And she was like, why don't you have extensions? And again, the whole girl and what do y'all do this and what type of dude? Like, it was weird. And I'm like, but we've never even met one another before. And like, this is your perception of what you think African American women are.
Based on media.
Based on media, based on what they see on TV, what they see in magazines. They have this perception of this Black African American, all African American women just being, you know, this Shanae character on TV, or this, you know, fighting in the club, or like whatever they see on Love and Hip Hop. And to me, that was just like heartbreaking because I'm like, I'm here to learn. Like, I didn't display these actions or this energy or display these characteristics. Why are you assuming? So I think that was like my biggest goal of why I started Girl You Going Where, because I really wanted to push, motivate, encourage African American women to travel and to be able to change the narrative. Like, be a part of going out into the world and exchanging those cultural experiences with one another so we can change the narrative of what people think of us.
Beth, did you have something?
Yeah, so I can really relate to a lot of those perceptions of what America is and what Black America is and how people view that because of the movies that are exported from our country and just kind of the cultural global influence that America has throughout the world. And I had some of the same experiences of people just, you know, yelling the B word because they heard me speak in English to someone, or, you know, talking, you know, with other kinds of American slang that wouldn't be appropriate in their own language. And I've had a lot of those conversations with people of like, well, if I said X, Y, and Z in Romanian, would that be offensive to you? And they're like, yeah, don't say that. And I was like, well, it's the same thing if you're like using that language and talking. And I think that's one of the, I struggle. I love traveling. I love taking trips, but I really also think it's really important to like spend enough time in a place to like actually be able to make at least one connection at that one-on-one level. And because I saw a lot of comments about that, wanting to relate to somebody, but not taking the time to actually connect at that personal level and see each other as humans and like try to understand each other's perceptions. In Romania, I think in some ways it's very homogenous. And so I do feel like they respond to either Black Americans or African, Black folks from Africa as like exotic. There's a curiosity there. The one notable figure was a news anchor in Bucharest that everybody celebrated and were curious about and interested in. But it is still a very racist country, but their racism is more linked to the Roma population. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of the same similar structural racist issues as we have in the States. And there's, at that time, very, very open aggression towards Roma, the lack of ability to even get an education because they don't have the paperwork necessary to enroll their children in schools. And then interestingly enough, more globally in Europe, Romanians are then linked to Roma. And then it kind of furthers that tension because other places in Europe look down on Romanians because of that connection to Roma. And the Roma people are a tribal community that, from what I've read, is linked to India, of folks that made their way up into Europe. And so that has changed. There are a lot of human rights organizations working to integrate Roma youth in particular into the school system. One of my kind of funny stories from Peace Corps is that I actually lived in the same town as Ethan Hawke's mom. She was a Peace Corps volunteer in the same town as me. So I'd go over and watch like movies with Ethan Hawke's mom, which is kind of funny, but part of her job was creating this foundation that really worked to support Roma education. And I have gone back. I actually went back in 2011 and we're planning a 20th anniversary reunion with my Peace Corps group in 2022, so soon, as long as we can travel. And I think it has opened up and changed in similar ways that we've heard from Thailand. I took with me a friend who is an Indian American, and I kind of wanted to prep her in advance because I didn't know what she would experience, and I wanted to make sure that she had a good trip and felt welcomed. I knew, of course, my friends and my loved ones there would, but I didn't know what people might say to her, and luckily she did have a positive experience. But I also think, groups like the Peace Corps, groups like the teaching program that Chrishella went through really need to be considered about the support that they offer participants in those programs and how much they really help, with mental health and additional support to make sure that experience doesn't, damage or further traumatize people that are experiencing that level of racism when they are abroad. Mm-hmm.
And, if I could just add to those last couple of statements from Beth, during my time in Thailand, and I mean, when I left Thailand, I was pretty bitter, exactly to your point, Beth, because that racism that, I felt there, and I know my other friends of color felt the same way. And we had nowhere to talk about it. And I don't even know, I guess it is racism, but you see such a distinction between how, and in Thailand, I'm just going to say specifically in Thailand during my time there, and how those of us of color were treated versus our white Peace Corps friends. they were treated like kings and queens, you guys. Like literally, I have never seen anything like that in my lifetime. And it was just, and you internalize all of that, and so in some ways it almost felt worse than what I experienced here, in the US. And I truly hope that times and things have changed, there in Thailand. But it is traumatic when you see just overtly how white people, it doesn't matter if you're white American or from Europe, it's as long as your skin is white and you are white, you automatically get that privilege and you're treated like royalty. That is really traumatizing.
Do you feel like since your experiences living other places, has it changed the way you interact with other people who might be different than you? Like, are you like, I wonder sometimes if we all have sort of this latent othering that we do for when we see somebody that's not like us, and if traveling breaks that, if it allows you to see people in a different way.
I think that travel changed my, I think it made me more understanding. I think it not in a not in a negative way. I think I changed for the better in regards to like my perceptions and be willing to accept the differences of everybody. I think it opened my eyes to this level of abundance that we live in America. When you see a family or a community, because when we were in each country, we actually lived within communities. We didn't stay like in hotels or resorts or anything. We actually lived in neighborhoods and built relationships with neighbors and things like that. And I think that just made me be more open to like accepting of all types of people. And I think that was the greatest gift of me being abroad that I gained from my experience. And I think it changed me for the better in that aspect.
I'd agree with that. It definitely opened my eyes to be like, girl, you don't know their story. You don't know why they trying to get here or why they live the way they live. So I definitely like second what Tashonda said.
I agree. And I would also say that I then overcompensate when I travel, right? When I see other people of color, especially if I can tell they're American, right? And they're they're people of color from America, I overcompensate now. And I want to help make sure that they feel welcome, especially when I travel back to Asian countries. And I already do that here. And I'm doing that like globally too, right? And it's just like, wow, it just never ends.
There's a question in the chat. Somebody asked a younger person that's on the call. They want to know, what is the benefit of traveling? I do encourage people to travel in general, and what is the benefit of that? And how can they get exposed, besides Peace Corps, to what's a good way to dip your toe in if you're not already a world traveler like you guys?
Go ahead, Chrishella.
I tell everybody, if you get a chance to go outside the U.S., go. Like, it literally opens your eyes to so much more, from race to just life in general. We don't have to live the life that we live over here. Not saying that it's completely bad, but where I live, the government took care of the people who work there. They took care of their data. They took care of the people that were working there. I didn't have to worry about insurance. They paid for where I stayed and my utilities. They made sure that they were taking care of the people that were taking care of their young people, because that's the next generation. So they took care of us really well. I tell everybody to go. Like, go even if you have like just a little thought of going, get your passport, just start the process, and we'll work on where you're gonna go with your passport later. But right now, just get it.
I will say that I am an advocate for women traveling. I'm an advocate for just travelers as a whole. And I think that it's vital and important for you to be able to create your own world perspective instead of allowing social media, allowing the TV and magazines to be able to create this image of what's out there, when in actuality, for you to really feel what the world is all about, you got to experience it, taste it, feel it, live it, swim in the oceans. You have to do that for yourself. And the only way you do it is by traveling, by exploring, by getting these opportunities to get outside of the country. I always tell people that, like, don't worry about the where, just get the passport first, because there's so many resources and opportunities for you to be able to go where you want to go, and for cheap. It's possible. I tell people all the time, it's possible for you to be able to get out here, and it's not as expensive as people think it is. So I'm an advocate. I sit down with people and I help plan trips. I show them websites and apps and things that they can get them started.
If I share with everybody the link to your blog, do you have resources on there where people can kind of start to explore?
I can get resources on there. The blog is from when I did it abroad, but it's trips that I've taken since. So it's all the types of information. I show you how to pack in a carry-on. I do all types of stuff. So I just think that there, outside of COVID, I think that there is a necessity for people to just see as much of the world as you can, so that you can really know who you are on this map, on this world, on Earth, like who you are as an individual and how much you mean to this community of the world and how much you can bring to it. Like, you won't know until you really feel it and experience it for yourself.
Olivier, where you were disconnected, we had a young 20-something that wanted to know what are the benefits of traveling? Do you encourage people to travel, and what are some of the ways you can start to dip your toe into that? Any advice? And then Olivier, then we go to Minza, and then Beth. I'll let you close us out with that.
I think what Deshonda said is absolutely right. Start small, start wherever you can, and do it. Although I have a foreigner's experience coming to America, I didn't do a lot of traveling until I met who is now my wife. But when we were in college together, she had a love for traveling, and she really exposed me. She brought me to France for the first time. We met after she came back from Paris, and she really instilled a love of traveling in me. And having moved to America as a foreigner, I kind of relished those new experiences, showing up somewhere completely unexpected, and just go for it. And you find out a lot about yourself in the process, going somewhere where you don't necessarily speak the language and traveling all of those obstacles. But I'm sure Deshonda's resources are probably better, but there were a few when we were on campus. Traveling as a student, it can be done pretty efficiently and somewhat, reasonably. There's a lot of opportunities. So I would say wherever it is that you can go, try, start. And I've never met anybody who've regretted traveling. So.
Minza?
Definitely all the points that have been made already. And I would just add, it just really, traveling the world just makes you realize how much bigger the world really is. Like, I think we all know that conceptually, but when you actually are out there traveling, it's like, wow, I belong to this greater thing than myself, than this little corner of the world that I live in. And I think that's what begins that internal work and that internal dialogue around compassion, understanding people who are different from you, understanding other cultures, and it pushes you to grow. You can't travel and not grow. Like, that just does not happen, and so it's just, in all ways, it's invaluable beyond articulation. But I would sum it up into saying, you just realize you belong to something so much greater than your little corner of the world.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, I didn't really grow up in a family that traveled unless we could drive our Suburban there. And so, you know, I took a really big leap of faith to have my first international trip be to go live somewhere for 2.5 years. And I'm so glad that I did it. And, you know, Chrishella mentioned earlier, you know, once you are there, it can be a lot less expensive than you think it is. And especially like once you get to a place like Europe, you know, I was able to go to Turkey and all around Eastern Europe and Central Europe. And I went to Greece for $100. And so I think that it's definitely beneficial. I think the two lessons that I've really held on to over time from that experience is one, I had to really learn how to just go with the flow, because, you know, in Romania, there's a public transit system called a maxi taxi. And sometimes you just have to stand on a corner that's not marked, that somebody tells you a van will come to, and then you just get in the minivan and you just give somebody some money, and you got to trust that they're going to take you where you need to go. And there's so many times where that instinct to control something or to like make it go your way steps into life, especially with the complexity and you know, all of what we deal with in America in terms of all of the choice and all of the priorities we have to make about how to spend our time. And sometimes life will just present you a beautiful path, and you just have to be open to it, and you have to just let go and assume that it's going to work out. And that's something I constantly that I learned from that experience, that I'm constantly bringing back, and it enriches my life on an annual basis. And then I think the other piece is when you do travel, I think you can know something intellectually and you can understand the history of something, but to be in the space and feel the energy and have that emotional connection to it, it just broadens your understanding of the world in such a deep way. So, you know, Romania, you know, there were a lot of Jewish folks that were pulled out of Romania during World War II, that were killed by the Nazis. You didn't really understand the impact on the Jewish community until I happened to be walking in the town that I lived in, which was called Baku. No reason to go there except to take a train somewhere else. I love the people there. It's not really a beautiful place or an interesting place. It's very gritty and gray and has a very Russian influence on it, but I love living there. But I stumbled upon a cemetery, a Jewish cemetery. There's no one left to take care of the Jewish cemetery. Mm-hmm. And you see the impact that that has on the physical landscape of the place. And then I was able to travel to Auschwitz and to the home of Elie Wiesel, and you just connect with history and culture in a different way. Similarly, I took a trip recently to South Africa, and, you know, I knew about apartheid, but I knew about Nelson Mandela, but you just understand it differently when you're in a space and you see it and you have conversations with people. And I really, you know, have drawn on that experience a lot with the recent protest in terms of, you know, Nelson Mandela broke the law. He was not on the favor of the lawmakers, but he was a leader, and he was leading in the way that needed to happen to make change. And, you know, there's a lot of dynamic right now with the police and the people who is on the right side of history here. And I think that that really plays itself out. And I don't know if I would have thought about it in that way had I not been so open to travel and experiencing new things and trying to see things from other people's perspective.
That's so good. It's so good. In the chat, I'm actually, when the link for the replay is ready, once we close out, it'll start rendering. When it's ready, I'll share it with everyone who is on the panel and the participants. I'm also going to print the chat and share it because I realize a lot of people can't see all the comments because they're coming straight to the panelists, but there's so much interesting discussion happening in the chat just around the value of travel, people's experiences. I've always had an interest in traveling. I don't think I would be a solo traveler. My partner in crime, Sofina, who previously worked for Fuel, would just come to work one day and be like, I just got some tickets to go to a random place in the world. Wait, what? Just no fear, just a passion for traveling. Just once she was, you know, once she had her mindset that she was going somewhere, she would not stop until she found that's you. Yeah. And she would say, it doesn't cost as much as you think, and it's so exciting and the people are so interesting. And so you've definitely encouraged me to, once we've kicked COVID-19, I'll be hopping on a plane, going somewhere, hopefully with one of you. I want to thank all of you so much for being a part of this panel. Olivier, thank you. Chrishella, Deshonda, Beth, Minza, Maria Burke. Let me see. She put a comment in here, and let me see. Here it is. Maria Burke. Thanks, Maria, for the comment. Her comment was, "Travel is the only expense that makes us richer." Isn't that beautiful? Thank you so much for your, I mean, you got us all excited about traveling, but you added a lot of insights about how race is viewed in the world, and we all of our countries have a lot to learn from each other about how to treat each other equally, regardless of race, class, tone, whatever it might be. Lessons learned everywhere we go. So thank you all for illuminating your experiences with us. So at this point in the discussion, I know some folks have to hop off because you got a conference call with the boss. I understand. So if you got to hop off right now and do that, feel free to do that. And the panelists too. But during this time, I encourage people to go into the chat and make sure you share it with the panelists and the participants if you want everyone to see. And send a little love note to our panel. Tell them, you know, how great they are, how amazing they are, how accomplished they are. Oh my God, they're world travelers. They're so cultured. And okay, little love notes in the chat, okay? And we have a lot of people that wanted to talk about this and have very different experiences than the ones that we heard about today. So potentially we'll do a part 2. What would you like for us to cover if we do a part 2 of this discussion about the way people live and interact with each other all around the world? Put those comments in the chat. And while you're doing that, I found a cute video to share. Just 5 minutes. It's not going to take long. While you're leaving your comments, we're going to watch this video together if you like. If you can't, hop off, and that's true for the panelists and the participants. And at this point, I'll say thank you all for participating. Great discussion, and let's watch this together. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. When it comes to racism, don't worry, America. We're not the only ones. Let me see. Can you guys hear that? Let me make sure. Okay.
Here at Decoded, we're all about examining the intersection of race and pop culture in interesting and funny ways. But because I'm American, this show is largely from an American perspective, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, except week after week we get comments along the lines of, "Why is America so obsessed with race?" Or, "So glad I don't live in America, we don't have racism like that here." As wonderful as it would be to have a country without racism, those just don't exist. In reality, racial inequality is a global issue. So let's take a little tour. Oh God, this thing is heavy. Number 1, China. Around 92% of China's population is considered part of one ethnic group known as Han Chinese, and the rest are ethnic minorities. And generally speaking, homogeneity isn't so good for racial attitudes. Anti-Black sentiment in China surged in the 80s when the Chinese government gave scholarships to African students in China. A lot of Chinese citizens hated their government giving money to foreigners, and so began a slew of anti-African protests all over China. Another slightly stranger example of anti-Black attitudes is that several Chinese posters for the film Star Wars: The Force Awakens minimized or completely erased John Boyega. On some posters, even Lupita Nyong'o's CGI character was taken out. Now we're reaching a whole new dimension when we're racist against a CGI character. Use the Force. Except when the Force is racism. Number 2, Argentina. Argentina is no stranger to racism. In Argentina, the Spanish word negro, which refers to Black people, sometimes gets used to describe laborers and poor people in general, regardless of race, mixing class and race into a big old racist cocktail. No thanks, I'm driving. And it's not just anti-Black sentiment. In 2015, after a meeting with Chinese investors, the Argentinian president tweeted a racist comment, making fun of the investors' accents by switching her R's and L's, and asking, did they only come for lice and petroleum? Ugh. I mean, would you want the leader of your country feeling comfortable saying completely racist things? Donald Trump. Sorry, there was a bigot in my throat. Number 3, Japan. In 2014, a banner was hung on the entrance of a major Japanese soccer stadium that read, "Japanese only." And in 2015, criticism exploded online after Ariana Miyamoto became the first half-Black Miss Japan. One critic even said, Japan should be represented by a pure blood. Yikes. But it's not just foreigners. Discrimination among Japan's own ethnic groups is a problem too. Take the Burakumin. People in this minority group were formerly at the bottom of the caste system, and to this day often get stereotyped as criminals and have a harder time finding employment, though most citizens outside this group will say that racism doesn't happen. Number 4. Australia. Australia has a long, dark history of race conflicts with the Aboriginal people. Similar to the treatment of Native Americans, the British settlers in Australia treated the indigenous people as subhuman, and many of them were killed in large numbers by disease and massacres. In the 20th century, they were put into missions and forced into unpaid labor. Only as recently as 1975 was a Non-Discrimination Act passed. But unfortunately, racism against Aboriginals is still rampant. Systemic discrimination means the indigenous people are victims of racial profiling. Only about 2% of the population is Aboriginal, and yet they make up a whopping 27% of those incarcerated in Australia. Australia also has problems with its Asian student population. The bullying, assault, and killing of Indian students in Australia has even gotten the name curry bashing. Anti-Indian sentiment got so bad that in 2010, the Indian government actually issued a travel advisory for Indian residents going to Melbourne. Number 5, the Netherlands. The Dutch police force racially profiles a lot of people who don't look like they're from the Netherlands. An Amnesty International report in 2013 confirmed that many Dutch officers use things like age, skin color, and ethnicity to determine who looks suspicious. Genetics used to justify racism? Who would have thought? When talking about the Berber ethnic groups of the Netherlands, one Dutch police officer was recently quoted berating them, saying the Berbers find it easier to live in the streets because of a genetic trait. And who is this officer? Well, he's the 2015 head of the diversity and discrimination budget for the Dutch police. Probably should have done a background check on that guy. So the good news is Americans aren't alone in the fight against racism. The bad news? Racism is everywhere. But you have to acknowledge the system first in order to dismantle it. While there's nothing wrong with taking pride in your home country, it's important to remember that no nation is perfect. We've all got a lot of work to do. So where are you from, and what are the global stories that you think matter? Tell us in the comments below, and we'll see you next time right here on Decoded.
Mom.
Isn't that interesting? It's so interesting. So again, thanks to all of you. We got some love notes in the chat for you, and hopefully some ideas for me if we go back and do part 2. Yep, lots of good stuff. We're doing a part 2, okay? Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the participants. I want you guys to have a great rest of the day.
Thank you guys so much.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Pleasure to meet everyone.
Nice meeting you as well. Bye, guys.
Bye.
I'm trying to find the button to leave.
It's just you and me, girl.
This was really good. So thank you for even thinking of me, considering me. I found the button.
Okay, good. Thanks for sharing your experiences. Oh, wait. Talk to us about the art thing, your art packets.
Okay, so I'm sorry. Every time I laugh, my eyes get watery, so I'm not crying. But we have art kits to go at Vibez. So we have a small kit, we have a large kit. It has your brushes, your paint, everything is sketched out for you. Some of them even come with video instruction that you can follow on our YouTube page. They range from $20 to $30, and it's fun. It's a fun little family kit. You just come pick it up. You order it and pick it up the next day. And if we
order it from your website,
we'll call you. Yep, go to our website, vibezcreativeartspace.com. That's Vibez with a Z, VIBEZ, creativeartspace.com, and just click at home art kits, and we'll be ready to go. You pick whatever you want, and if it's something that you want that's not listed, just send us a message, and I'm pretty sure we can make it happen.
I'll put a link to your website in the follow-up email for everybody, so everybody that participated will see it too.
Oh, yay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
All you do. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye, guys. Just want to make sure all the comments are done coming through. How do we define Black in the US as opposed to in different countries? That's very interesting. I love that. Yes, I'll share the link to the video that we just watched. I'll put it in the follow-up. Great ideas. Great ideas. Okay, I think I got all your comments. Bye, guys.